Having me on.
And welcome to Advantage Radio Ministries and welcome to Second Chances here at Lift FM. Our guest today is Dr. Katariina Rosenblatt. She is a PhD. She is also the author of a book entitled Stolen, the True Story of a Sex Trafficking Survivor. And Dr. Katariina, give us a little bit of background, who you are, and then we're going to get into the book and talk about all different aspects of the book. But give us a little bit of background on who you are and where you're from and different things like that.
Hi, Greg. Thank you, and thank you for having me on your show.
Our pleasure.
How I got started in the fight against human trafficking was by experiencing it firsthand myself. As a 13-year-old growing up in Miami, in South Florida, I soon became prey to a trafficking ring that was networked in the hotel where I was staying at with my family over the summer. And that was the first time I experienced abduction. Unfortunately for me, I would go on to experience it a couple of more times, including in my middle school where I was recruited. And I eventually dropped out of school, became addicted to cocaine, was locked in a brothel in a residence in Broward County. But God was faithful through it all and led me out of the darkness and into his loving arms. He took away the addiction to cocaine and eventually led me to get my GED, to now obtaining my PhD and starting a nonprofit ministry called There Is Hope for Me. And I've written this book, Stolen, along with my co-author, Cease Murphy, to help bring awareness to others so that they can protect their children from being trafficked or know how to help those that may already be in the situation.
Now, I don't know, I know very, very little about what we're going to be talking about today, but here is something that I think that I know. It is probably a miracle for the small percentage of people that do escape this trafficking, but to be abducted more than once and to be set free from it more than once is an absolute positive miracle. Is that correct?
I would say so. At least in my life, that's who I attribute it to. All the glory goes to God, because most children who are caught up in this, you're correct, they die of suicide, malnourishment, drug overdose, sexually transmitted disease, or murder. I'm fortunate to be here and experiencing it on more than one occasion. It definitely is a miracle, but it's also a calling and a burden, which I can't get away from. I know that I'm called to help rescue other kids out of this, and that experience, having it happen more than once, has given me an immense determination to see that children are saved, rescued, and that the traffickers are prosecuted.
Tell us, if you could, tell us about your first time when you were abducted as a young child in Miami. And is that area, Miami, a hot spot for that type of activity? Because I've heard of other situations in Miami.
Yes. Unfortunately, Miami is a very transient area, and it's close to the water, airports. I mean, you can travel out of the country easily, but it's also home to a lot of drugs, a lot of domestic violence and abuse in the home situation. I think Florida in itself is number 2 in the country for human trafficking, and Miami itself was the hub for the Colombian cartel, the cocaine cowboys back in the 80s, which is when I was trafficked there and experienced it at the hands of some of these drug dealers. So it is definitely a growing problem. It's become a national security issue, from what I understand, engaging agencies from, of course, the FBI and Homeland Security to even the Department of Defense.
Share with us a story about your first abduction.
The first time I got recruited, I was a 13-year-old young, naive young woman, barely into my teenage years. I had just finished elementary school and was over the summer staying at a hotel with my mom and my brother, my family, and at that hotel, my mom had gone to work. She would take 2 buses to work and leave me at the hotel, and I got lonely. And being at the pool area, this trafficking ring sent a trafficker, a recruiter, who was 19, and she was thin and pretty and everything I thought I wanted to be, and she befriended me. And the first time I got lured into it was through false friendship. And this girl was not really a friend. She used my trust against me. She gained my trust over the course of a month, which is the grooming period. And after that time, she introduced me to her pimp, who told me I could call him daddy. And she kept using the daddy hole, which was the lure that I had, because I longed to have a father figure. And when she would introduce me to her pimp, he told me I can ask him for anything and call him daddy. And so when I was hungry, he handed $1, and he said, but one day you'll owe me for this $1 for chips. And see, a lot of people don't realize even kids in America go hungry sometimes because they come from single-parent homes, economic disadvantage, and that leaves them vulnerable to be preyed upon by these opportunists and tricksters. And so he used that to gain a bond in my life, which is called the trauma bond, and that began to make me feel like I owed him. And he would capitalize on that soon after by using Mary to entice me to play a game. And she told me we were going to play a game and I was going to be the bride. But what it really was a sex tourism trade happening right here in Miami. And there was a customer, 65-year-old man, who wanted to purchase me for my virginity. But unbeknownst to me, I went along with it thinking Mary was my friend. And I went to meet her in the stairwell and took her by the hand. I had put on my little white jean dress, the only white dress I owned, and she took me into this hotel room to meet this man, another father figure type, but instead he wanted to purchase sex. And it was there that I got my first exposure to the commercial sex industry and what they wanted from me.
Hmm. After your first encounter there, what happened after that?
Well, I had been introduced to Jesus at a Billy Graham crusade right before that. And even though I didn't have a lot of religious upbringing, there was somebody in the room with me, along with the trafficker and the John, and that was God. And as this man approached me and he began to touch my shoulders and my hair and tell me how beautiful I was, I started to get scared. And instead of sitting with him on the bed, I knelt down on the floor like in a praying position. And I remember crying out to God and asking him if he would help me, because I couldn't understand why they were negotiating me for sale. I didn't even know I was for sale. And see, Mary had a plate filled with marijuana. That's how they get kids to stay initially. So drugs are the gateway to trafficking. And as she prepared this marijuana on a plate, she told me it was good for me. She started to negotiate with the man. And she said, well, how much will you pay for her? Here's your girl. She's ready for you. And he said, $500. And she said, no, I want $550. She's a virgin. And with that, he was ready to partake in his transaction. He agreed on the price, and Mary tried to get me to take the pot, which is how I would become defenseless. But God spoke to my heart and told me not to take the drugs and reminded me my mom had said, always say no to drugs. So I fought back, and I didn't take the drugs. And this guy started to ask me questions. He said, would anyone miss you if you were gone? I said, yeah, my mom would miss me. He said, would anyone be able to hear you if you screamed right now? And I said, yes, my mom would hear me, and I'll scream really loud. And I got up, and I put my hand on my hips, and I fought back because God had given me the boldness. And with that, the man got upset, and he kicked us out, only to find out that I had just angered what I thought was my best friend. And she took me back downstairs, and she made me promise not to tell my mom, which is the same MO for all traffickers. You know, don't tell anybody, otherwise bad things are going to happen to you. or we're going to hurt your mom or something like that. And it doesn't take a lot to intimidate a kid, you know. And so I didn't tell my mom, and I thought I had to make it up to Mary. Well, the next day she sent other kids to me, and they lured me away into a waiting car, and kidnapped me. And that was the first abduction. And they drugged me and tried to kill me and left me on the side of the road. But God had another plan. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. And He led me to stagger, to get up and walk, and I staggered to a payphone, and I dialed 0, and I was able to make it through to my mom and the hotel, and they were able to rescue me and find me on the side of the road. But I still wouldn't believe that this girl, Mary, wasn't my friend until I saw her a few days later as my mom was finding an apartment for us out of the hotel. She was recruiting a 10-year-old little boy on the sidewalk. I wish I could have stopped that, because what I know now is that 1/3 of victims are also boys. But unfortunately, I couldn't do anything about it at that time, but I can now. And so that was my first experience, led in abduction and attempted murder. I would eventually go on to experience rape and violation and another experience in my middle school. But I didn't know that that was going to happen to me yet.
And in the course of both of these situations, obviously you talked about your first encounter and how God was there with you. Was He there in a similar fashion when you had these other situations, rape and abuse and different things?
He was faithful, even though I grew more rebellious. Because I didn't have a stable home life, I had a father who beat me, and I would try to leave him to go to a better situation, which is how I wound up in the second trafficking ring. Was leaving one situation, I wound up on the sofa of my friend's house, hoping to find a safer place, only to find something worse. Her father was a pedophile, and he used his daughter, who he was already abusing, to recruit other 14-year-olds. And so just 6 short months later, after having been bullied in my first middle school and then transferring to this other school, I wound up getting recruited again, but this time her dad sold us for $40 each. And when we went down into the car, they blindfolded us and kidnapped us again and took us to an apartment complex in Broward. And when we were in this apartment complex, they made it seem like we were going to be big girls and we didn't need to go to school, and they tried to paint a false picture. Again, another false friend, another false family-like environment, but it wasn't. And soon enough, they gave us drugs and alcohol, and instead of pool parties and pancakes, we wound up getting cocaine and alcohol, and I became heavily addicted to drugs. But in a moment of clarity, God was there with me. I became very rebellious and angry because of the prior hurt and physical abuse I experienced. But now when I was sitting on the sofa in this brothel apartment and this man in the room with my friend, and I knew it was my turn, I had done the drugs to just numb the pain from before and just succumb to that lifestyle, thinking that this was, I guess, what my life was and the plan for my life. But God spoke to my heart, and He said, no, I have a plan for your life, and this is not it. And at that moment, I looked at the door with that moment of clarity, and the guy who used to guard the door, the enforcer, he went to get cigarettes or something at the store, and he wasn't there. And I remember running to the door and unlocking all the latches, because it was a regular day like today, but he would protect other people from coming in or guard us from leaving. And now there was nobody there. And I ran out into the daylight, a regular day like today, when I should have been in school, but I wasn't. I was only in middle school. And I wound up experiencing the sunlight on my face and recognized that I had become a drug addict for these people and a prostitute, not even wanting to admit that identity, not wanting to hold on to that identity. I just knew God had spoken to my heart, and I was so ashamed. See, my mom had taught me values. She had taught me to be a good girl, And I fought back with them again, and I told them that you're lying to us. This isn't love. This isn't real. I want to go home to my mom. I want to be a good girl. And they finally brought me back. And I knew God was with me, but I was terrified, Greg, because these grown men sat me down in a chair and intimidated me. And they told me all the terrible things they were going to do to my family and to me if I ever told anyone. They knew where I went to school, who my teachers were, and who my family was. And so I had a choice. Either I tell my family and get them in trouble with these criminals, or I just go back to school like nothing happened. And that's what I did. I went home and took a hot shower, and they let me call my mom with a monitored phone call threatening me if I said anything. And the next day, they saw my friend was there whose dad had the ring, and they planted drugs in my purse and sent the message, if you don't want to be with us, this is what's going to happen. This is just the beginning. And so as a 14-year-old, they intimidated me for a long time, letting me know what I had become and what would happen to me. And so I dropped out of school, and I became nothing but a drug addict. And it was another day that I wound up getting recruited again. But this time I was angrier, I was more rebellious. I wound up getting involved in gangs, and just really my self-esteem and my life totally deteriorated. But for God, He was so faithful to do what He told me at the Billy Graham Crusade, that He would never leave me or forsake me. And He's using that same message now to bring hope to so many precious survivors, both boys and girls. And I'm just honored to be part of that work.
Mm. You write in your book that you and other girls that were recruited and eventually kidnapped, if you will, all kind of felt like losers, like you were hopeless and lost, and now you're out of that. And how do you deal with all those feelings of anger, hopelessness, hurt, all the things that go along with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really think that's why God led me to start this ministry. It's from survivors to survivors. And when I work with both girls and boys, I get so much joy in seeing them redeemed, in introducing them to a relationship with Jesus Christ. I've been able to pray with so many survivors to receive Christ in their heart, and then to see their life totally transformed, like from night to day, that they come out of prostitution, the drug addiction goes away, they become mothers, they become, family members, they hold down a regular job. And when I see them and that they're doing good, I can't help but feel like there was purpose in the pain, and it's all forgotten and it's all forgiven. But there are times, of course, in my own life that I still have to heal. And God is so gracious and faithful to just lovingly walk with me through that healing process and bring the right people into my life, to help me along in that journey.
Now, as a result of a lot of the information that you were exposed to with your numerous kidnappings and abductions, were you ever able to help law enforcement to get some of these people off the street?
Well, I was fortunate. Unfortunately, I should say, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as a human trafficking task force, which we are a part of now. Our ministry is under that with Homeland Security in Miami. And we do work very closely alongside the FBI and Homeland Security, local law enforcement, etc. But back then, the only guy that got arrested was one of the Johns, and he got arrested for child abuse because there is no such law as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act like we have today that says anyone under 18 engaged in commercial sex is a victim. There's none of that. So the only prosecution was for child abuse of this one man because my friend got pregnant. Mm. But I did work with law enforcement, just recently because my book did release, and I asked them to come to my book signing because it was in Miami. And so they were able to do some investigation regarding my own case to make sure that I would be safe. And I was really grateful for that.
Wonderful. Now, obviously, one of the blessings of your ministry is you've been able to help others. During your time that you were trafficked and involved in this, were you able to help any other girls at the same time you were able to get yourself set free?
Well, not really understanding what the issue was. Like most victims, even today, Greg, they don't self-identify as victims of trafficking. All I knew is it was a bad situation. These were bad guys. And so there was one occasion that they tried to get me to become a recruiter. And at that moment I said, no, I can't give this pain, this sin, this bad life is what I felt like it was. I can't give this to somebody else. There's no way I'm going to do that and destroy their innocence and destroy their life and introduce them to you guys. And so actually I have been approached for that on more than one occasion, but I was grateful that God did not allow that and gave me the awareness to understand it. And then, of course, the best friend that I had at that time, when I got out of it, she got out of it, and we have remained friends all these years, so I'm grateful. She married a football player and wound up having a life in California.
Wonderful. Now, obviously, a lot of this traces back to parents trying to keep their kids safe. What advice could you give a parent that is concerned that their child could be prey to that kidnapping, to that trafficking?
Well, I would say, number one, love your child. Number two, know who your child's friends are. And number three, if your child asks to spend the night or has an older boyfriend that is over 18 for sure, investigate and get involved. Don't just allow your child to go anywhere. I went for a sleepover, and it took me many years to get over the unforgiveness I had towards my mother, that she didn't try a little harder to find out who these people were, these crazy parents, because I was in danger. And at that time, she could have just picked up the phone. Don't just take it for granted if your kid gives you a phone number and says, oh, I'm over at Sue or Betty's house. You find out who those parents are, that family, if they're really there. And if they're dating an older guy, you want to know what's going on. If they need a mentor or a father figure in their life, get involved in your local church or youth group and engage the youth pastor to get involved in your child's life before they fall prey to victimization by false friends and false father figures.
How did your book come to be?
That was a gift from God, too. Totally, like everything in my life, my master's degree, my PhD, and one day I went to the Florida Christian Writers Conference on a scholarship, only to find out when I got there, a gentleman I met named Steve Lawson heard that I wanted to write a book and share my story. And I was already doing some public speaking, sharing my story to others and other kids. He said, you need to talk to Cease Murphy. And two other people throughout the conference sat me down and said, you need to talk to this man. And eventually God put us together, and he had been an abuse survivor himself as a young man growing up as a child. And it was just such a perfect fit. And Cease has been so gracious to me. He flew down and we met and we worked on the book together, and he just took it from there and introduced me to his agent, and then she found the right publisher who has made the book look so beautiful. And so I've just been really blessed by God to put this project together.
Tell us a bit more about your foundation, Stolen Ones. There is Hope for Me. Tell us a little bit more about the nonprofit.
Yes, the book is called Stolen, and so I created an organization called There is Hope for Me and another one called Stolen Ones. And what we do is the nonprofit, There is Hope for Me, we use as a way to help kids come out of trafficking by doing safe rescue. We go to the public school system, we go to foster care, juvenile jails, and even strip clubs, and rescue girls and boys by sharing our stories. Our whole program is founded on from survivors to survivors, and I've even created some tools, assessment tools that are on the website, thereishopeforme.org, where people can download. If you click on the interview tab, there's some resources. And the trafficking wheel and assessment tool are free to use, But we also do trainings to equip and engage the church to get involved in safe rescue and restoration. So we also provide life coaching from a Christian perspective from the American Association of Christian Counselors, and our survivor leaders now are in the process. We have about 5 of them who are getting certified as professional life coaches to go out and help other kids overcome their issue of trafficking.
Well, obviously, part of the reason that you are where you are today is because you had made that commitment at the Billy Graham Crusade to look at the Lord and turn to Him. And obviously, that's what a lot of people really need, to take that next step to ask Jesus Christ to be the Lord of their life. And they just need that opportunity like Billy Graham gave to you many years ago. And we were just wondering, Dr. Katariina, if you would be willing to lead those listeners that are ready to ask Jesus Christ into their life. Just lead them in the prayer to do so.
Oh, I would be so honored. Thank you. And please know, dear listener, that you have made the best decision of your life by accepting Jesus in your heart. And so would you pray with us? Dear Jesus, I invite you into my heart to be Lord of my life. I thank you for dying for my sins. I thank you for dying on the cross and shedding your blood for me, that I may be forgiven and washed clean. And today, I give you my life forever. I'm yours. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you for the privilege of sharing that with you. And I want you to know that you're valued and no one deserves to be abused or exploited.
Dr. Katariina Rosenblatt is our guest. And Dr. Katariina, one more time, if someone would like to find out about your nonprofit or find out about obtaining a copy of your book, best places to get that information?
www.thereishopeforme.org, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Our guest on Second Chances has been Dr. Katariina Rosenblatt. The book is entitled Stolen, The True Story of a Sex Trafficking Survivor. Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here from Advantage Radio Ministries here on Lift FM.